All right, looks like we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to Sasquatch Out of the Shadows Live. I'm your host, Alex Pedikov. It's been a while here since our last show, so nice to see everybody back here. And we're looking forward to have a good show. If you guys want to check out previous shows, there's a playlist on the channel. We're up to 13 now. Can't even keep track of it anymore, but so we're getting up there in the double digits. So check out previous shows. Next week, we'll have David Weatherly on. Going to talk about a lot of cool stuff with him, UFOs, cryptozoology, some of his research all over the country. But tonight, we are talking to Seth Breedlove, who I've had on the show before, and Andy Matsky, and we're going to talk about why there was no show last week, of course, but it's mountains of upstate New York, as well as a little foray into western Massachusetts and some other areas. Filming On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Journey, which is a feature-length documentary. It's a sequel to Small Town Monsters On the Trail of Bigfoot documentary series. And On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Journey is coming in March of 2021. So without further ado, let's bring in Seth and Andy. Hey, guys. How you doing?
I'm good. Hey, I'm good.
I'm doing good, too. I was just posting to Instagram that we're live.
Awesome. Getting the word out. So we have the same shirt on, Seth. This is the second time this happened.
Dude, I'm still I keep staring at it and I can't. I don't understand why it's white. So
strange. So his is green, right? Mine is green, and I don't know how to prove it to you guys on here because I tried to take a selfie, and it came out green. No, it didn't come out green. It comes out white. I just sent him the proof. Look. He's got the picture on the screen. It's green. The shirt is green, but it does look kind of cool like this. So I don't know if something's wrong with my camera on my computer or something, but anyway, obviously we are just back from an awesome expedition, production, whatever we want to call it. So this is sort of kind of the debrief recap. We obviously don't have all of our members here, but this is 3 out of the gang. So
fittingly though, I started thinking about this today. It's fitting that it's you, Andy, and I, because we're the 3 that did the most filming. I mean, we're the three that will be getting cinematography credits in the film, or the 3 of us. So it kind of makes sense that it would be us 3. So yeah, I never know how to do we're doing one of these recap shows on Monsteropolis tomorrow. So if you want to hear Mark's take on things, Monsteropolis, but otherwise, this will be the 3 of us. I like to think of it as like the grumpy old man and the 2 kids, the 2 wide-eyed, naive children.
Intrepid explorers. I guess we all are intrepid explorers in a way.
Yeah,
definitely.
Well, we were just talking before, not to derail your show already.
No,
we were just talking before about like a week ago tonight, or right at this time, we would have been in Lake George, New York, I think, are getting ready to go out to Buck Mountain, which is where we camped. So we did our first night ops right around. We were getting ready to do our first night ops right around this time a week ago. And I actually was reviewing that footage earlier. So it's like this time last week, the adventure was kind of just getting underway.
Yeah, it has us all pretty kind of depressed that we're not still there, as we just talked about. We would have been setting up probably our tents right around now, I'd imagine, given that we have just about an hour of daylight left here on the East Coast. But for folks who aren't aware, let's talk a little bit about what On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Journey is, and why we were adventuring in the first place. You want to start that out, Seth?
Yeah, so On the Trail of Bigfoot, the first, what people consider On the Trail of Bigfoot 1, was actually split into 2 films called On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Legend, and On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Search. And originally it was an episodic series told in 6 episodes ranging from 23 to 35 minutes in length. But they were split into these storylines, these 2 disparate storylines. One was, like I said, The Legend, which kind of focused on the history of the subject. And the second was called The Search, and it was much more about theories and the actual investigation into the Bigfoot subject. So I hit upon the idea of doing On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Journey as a, man, I don't know. To me, it's the first truly personal, I mean, like, I don't know how to put it. It is the first small town monsters documentary that is approached in this way, where we were documenting pretty much every step of the trip from the beginning. And what you'll see in the final movie is that journey. I mean, like it's
Right.
literally like you're going to go with us through the entire trip. And that's how the story is going to play out. You'll also learn a lot about New York, upstate New York history and Western Massachusetts. You'll see different investigators and learn about their techniques and methods, why they do it, what they do. And but there's some really cool moments in this thing. Like you'll get almost like a mini STM movie in the middle of the movie, all about the Kinderhook creature, which I'm really excited to get into. But yeah, it's going to be very much picking up where On the Trail of Bigfoot the Search left off. But it's definitely going to be like the most personal movie by far the most personal movie I've ever made, because I just don't think we've ever made anything that really tracked what we were doing in the moment to this extent. And it's picking up on things. I guess the closest you would get would be like the Area X episode of the first On the Trail of Bigfoot. But again, like that was more about the NAWAC, and this very much is about our little group and what we're doing. And that's the storytelling device we're going to use to walk people through the sort of history of upstate New York and Western Massachusetts.
Definitely. And that's why I say it really almost felt like an expedition. Mm-hmm. We were just, really exploring and checking out these areas. And you're right. We documented just us hiking, us doing that kind of adventurous sort of stuff. I think that's what really kind of stood out in a way, with even the first On the Trail of Bigfoot, if you want to call it that, just the series. It was almost like you guys were just kind of tagging along with some of these researchers.
Yeah, exactly.
And in a way it was part of the journey too, but this I felt was more, we did tag along with researchers and talk to witnesses and do all that sort of stuff, but it was much more like a collective group sort of journey into some of these areas, as if we were just coming in from the outside and trying to understand what was going on in a place like Whitehall or Western Massachusetts, somewhere that I think none of us have really explored or even considered exploring in a long time.
Well, yeah, I think that's the most important distinction is like this is not a place that any of us that were in our group were really super familiar with. I've been to the Adirondacks 3 times. I've been to Whitehall 3 times. This was my 4th time. But having said that, I was completely unfamiliar with a lot of the places we ended up getting into. So Whitehall, which really only comprised about half of a single day of our trip, was the only area that we were in that I was familiar with, where I knew where we were, like what we needed to do, where we were going, things like that. Once we got, and even Whitehall, like we did things that I never had done before. We hiked down to the Poultney River, and followed that trail in the dark, which was an awesome trip, by the way. I was just looking at some of the footage from that part of the trip earlier tonight, and maybe like what we should do is go day by day and kind of recap what we did each day, because that was like I think that was day 2.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. Just kind of, but before we do that, I did want to just go over a little bit. So obviously, the Beast of Whitehall, that's one of the first Small Town Monsters films that was about kind of the A-Bear Road incident and that sort of thing. So that's where you get your kind of familiarity with Whitehall. I've been to Whitehall one other time. I think Andy said that he had traveled through Whitehall at one point. So we all sort of kind of knew it, but I think the rest of the areas we just totally weren't familiar with. And what would you say, like, in terms of comparing Beast of Whitehall, just spending that day and a half, however long we were in Whitehall, in that area, how was it different than when you originally filmed Beast of Whitehall way back in the day?
I think aspects of this were actually a lot closer to my first trip to Whitehall back in July of 2015, which is crazy to think about. But like Beast of Whitehall was shot twice. So the first trip was this trip where I went with the producers at the time. We shot the entire movie, and that included our B-roll, and a lot of that B-roll, B-roll day trip stuff would be like just going up into the mountains and filming around. those mountains, but we never really got outside of the Wells or Whitehall area. We were either filming B-roll right around Wells, Speculator, or we were filming B-roll in Whitehall. But in some ways, this actually reminded me of that. So I would say in terms of that, it was very similar in that we were finding cool spots to film and we were shooting stuff. But yeah, completely different overall. Just because like, yeah, not to get too far ahead, but like you get, on Thursday we went for this helicopter flight, and you immediately get a sense that I actually had no idea where anything was, how big the area is. You hear 6 million acres, however many times it's stated in Beast of Whitehall, 6 million acres. Like you can take 5 of the largest national parks and slam them into that area, and they're going to fit in there. And so the size and scale of the Adirondacks, I guess, had never connected with me. Like I kind of thought I had seen a good chunk of the Adirondacks. And then I quickly realized, I don't even think now we've seen a good chunk of the Adirondacks.
That's what I was looking at. It's like we almost were in the southern portion for a little bit, right? The kind of broad area, the southern portion of Whitehall is basically right on the outskirts of it. Mm-hmm. And then up towards the High Peaks Wilderness where we were, that's not really the center. That's sort of to the right, almost towards Lake Champlain. Now, what was really interesting for me, I had never really spent much time in the Adirondacks. I don't think I ever went up really into the park aside from around Whitehall and on the Champlain side. So it was really interesting to kind of see a lot of those mountains that I was used to seeing from Vermont, because when you're standing in Burlington or Vergennes, Vermont, wherever you are, right on Lake Champlain, you're looking over and you've got this beautiful mountain view, and those are the high peaks right there. Uh-huh. So I was actually surprised when we were driving up and I saw a sign that said Port Henry 20 miles away. Port Henry, obviously famous for champ sightings, and I think I sent you guys the picture on my drive home. Uh-huh. I drove pretty much right over Lake Champlain. We went straight through Port Henry. We passed the sign that had all the champ sightings. So it was really interesting. And we talked about this obviously while we were there as well, how it kind of was like, for me, almost piecing together what this area looked like, because I just hadn't spent much time. And as you said, I don't think we even had a really big chunk of, the Adirondacks. There's still that entire other section of it. I mean, what do you think, Andy?
I mean, when you look at where we were, we stayed pretty much just to the eastern side of the park. I mean, we drove through part of it, I guess, but on the journey, for the most part, we stayed to the east. We went, north from Whitehall, but besides that, looking at a map, there's so much we didn't cover. It's like, it's crazy. It's like disconcerting almost how much we didn't get to. Because like you're saying, you hear that number and you don't really process it, but the land is so big. There's so much more. And like when you get into the high peaks, it feels like you're in a completely different place than when you're in Whitehall.
Yeah, that was what was so funny. I kept thinking about, we did that hike on Wednesday where we go to the top of Mount Hadley. We get up there and I'm like, this is unreal, man. Like, like I thought we'd reached like the high, the highs of like the Adirondacks, and we were basically on a foothill. Like at that point, compared to where we ended up on like Whiteface or flying over Mount Marcy, like Mount Hadley is a foothill.
Compared to 2,000 something feet, I think.
Yeah. But I mean, that doesn't, I'm not demeaning that.
No, of course.
It's absolutely gorgeous, but like, it's crazy how much geography you can cover in that 6 million acres, how big that is. And then also how much it can change. Because I do think something that stood out to me this time around was the changing terrain of the Adirondacks, where you have the sort of like classic, like huge mountainous regions like the High Peaks Wilderness, but you do have that kind of like East Coast or even like Southeast Coast kind of look to the mountains like Mount Hadley and those, more of the Southeast mountains that we went through. But you've also got the rugged, hilly terrain that reminded me of West Virginia, kind of like where we were over in Speculator and Wells area. That's what that reminds me of, is West Appalachia. That's what. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's what that area really reminds me of. Or you've got these. This was really apparent from flying in the helicopter, but the way the huge mountains spill out into these farmland valleys that very much look like the Midwest. And it's a really, and again, we haven't seen, to my mind, we haven't seen the Northwest or really much of the west side of the Adirondacks at all yet. So I'm curious, what the other parts of that park look like.
Oh, absolutely. So before we get any further into it, let's do that recap, as you were saying, kind of what we did and where we went. So obviously we were there basically from Monday to Friday, Saturday morning, really.
Yeah, Monday was we met up with you. So I guess it actually started at the beginning. We met up with you in what was that town? Was that Lake? Is that Lake Pleasant or
that was Speculator, I think.
It's Speculator. Okay.
Yeah.
So we met up with Alex and his brother Luca in Speculator, and then from there we went to a cave called how do you say it? Kumanja?
I don't know. It was spelled like Kajamuk or something. It was very strange, sort of. We're gonna butcher it either way.
It was this thing where like I didn't know where to go. Like Alex and I had been kind of like texting back and forth about like where to start the trip because I knew we'd need to meet him. And I also knew we weren't going to spend a ton of time in the central part of the Adirondack. So I thought it'd be nice to meet more toward like something central, which now looking at the map, we really weren't that central, but I mean, at least something more toward the middle of the park than where we ended up. So I picked this cave out just because I thought it would be just to tie this back to Bigfoot, I thought it'd be an interesting thing to show that, like this is kind of like your classic Bigfoot habitat. Like if you're into this subject and you follow where sightings tend to happen, this seems to me like to be the perfect 6 million acre habitat for something like a Bigfoot. There's a lot of like tourists, but there aren't that many people in the park. At least not when you're talking 6 million acres. So you got a lot of like isolated areas of the park, and this cave is really cool. I had found it online and I knew that the area around it was kind of interesting looking too. So we met Alex and then we drove to this cave. We did a quick like scene where we talked about Bigfoot habitat.
It was like our first sort of impression of the area, just driving in, because we were coming from different areas. So I was coming from New England, you were coming from Ohio with the rest of the crew. So it was kind of cool that we actually met at that spot. I mean, I'm pretty sure we walked into this area, and as soon as we saw this cave, we were like, wow, that's pretty cool. This is kind of this is how you start an expedition of this type. And we wandered around there for a little bit. It wasn't a huge cave. I mean, it was maybe 15, 20 feet deep, and kind of had a little like peephole up at the top sort of thing. But we walked around there, got some footage, and talked about just what our kind of initial impressions, I guess, of the area were driving in, because we drove into this little town. There's obviously a big lake, but you can start seeing a lot of the woods. And it was interesting when we were driving to the cave, how we were in a residential neighborhood. And I was at first thinking like, oh man, this is not like as wild as I thought it was. And then all of a sudden, boom, you'll hit a dirt road, and it's like this terrible dirt road to get to this cave where
we were on it for a while too.
Yeah,
right?
Like
10
minutes.
10, 15 minutes. Yeah.
I'm like, this is exactly what I expected. It like my perceptions changed in an instant, which was really cool. And then we walked around there for a little bit. And then basically from there, I think I'm going to get the timeline all messed up. From there, we went to Lake George area, I think, right?
Yeah. Well, first, before we get there, Andy, like, what was your first impression of like?
Oh, definitely
that part of the trip, because like you'd never really been into that area.
Yeah. I mean, my previous experience with the area was just Whitehall, so that was like truly the first Adirondacks we had gotten to, and we sort of touched on it earlier, but like, is it Speculator that we were in?
Yeah,
is fairly populated. I mean, it's no big town or anything, but there was a good amount of people there, and it was sort of like, oh, okay. But then we start driving towards this cave, and you immediately get removed from from society by yards of acres and acres of woods, and it's like, and they're big deep woods. It's like immediately separated by that, and that really sort of blew me away. And then you get to the cave, and it's like just that area was in like a small valley, was like immediately added sort of isolation on top of that, because on top of where the cave is, like you couldn't easily get to from where we were. So there already was like separation within the woods where things could go undetected easily.
We also didn't see a single person going back in there, which I thought was interesting. And you could hear the thunder from that storm coming in, which was like a preview of things to come.
Kind of what the cave looked like. I would pull up a picture on the screen here, but it'll crash my internet. So that's all you guys get. But yeah, definitely. I mean, it was just really interesting to see that. And I think the weather wasn't serving us so great because it was perfect while we were there. But as soon as we got out of there, we started getting hit with rain. Which was, I guess, good timing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then from there, we went to Lake George. And in Lake George, we had to check into a hotel. And then from there, we ate dinner. And then we met up with Steve Calls. Where did we meet Steve? I can't even remember. Like
at Stewart's, the now famous Stewart's. We went to Stewart's almost every day, everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere you go around New York, there's a Stewart's. Upstate New York, there's a Stewart's to be found. So from there we went to, he had chose this mountain state park called Buck Mountain, where apparently there had been some encounters in his group, including 2 sightings that he had in that area.
Yeah. He talked about it a few shows ago when he was on the program. So if you guys want to hear Steve Cole's talking about that, he's been researching that one area, I think, for 20 years, he was saying. So he's been in and out of there for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was like our base camp. So we set up there that night, and I don't know. I don't want to be the only one talking like remembering what happened. So you guys can pick it up from there.
Yeah. Well, so what we did was, the idea was we were going to camp out with Steve and his crew. So he has guys that he works with kind of on his research team. Some of them are former
lot of cops. Yeah.
Law enforcement. Yeah. Cops. People with like law enforcement / military style backgrounds. So that was really interesting because I don't think I've really spent too much time around a research group that is like that, where it's people coming from those very specific jobs and those very specific careers. So we camped out the first night with them, and then I think the next day I'm blanking out here. The next day we were in Whitehall.
Just to get into real quick, because we did a night quote unquote night ops in that on that Buck Mountain that first night. That was kind of interesting because it was basically like we did a walk down the road, paced out. And I believe, Alex, it was you and Mike with the therms, right?
Yes, I had a FLIR. He had another type of night vision type apparatus. So we were standing maybe 100 feet behind you guys. You guys in a bigger group were walking up forward. And it was amazing. We were doing. He taught me basically, you scan left, meet in the middle. I'll scan right. We meet in the middle. So that was kind of interesting. And we could see mice, little rodents, kind of scurrying around, but you couldn't hear them. But then we could see you guys obviously in front of us.
This is probably worth pointing out. Andy, was that your first experience doing something like that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that was my first time really squatching, I guess you could say, was that night. And it sort of hit me, personally reflecting on it, that, and I think I might have even said this to you, Seth, that like, I didn't know if I really wanted to experience all that much. I realized that like if I had, sort of thinking about what you guys had in X and things like that, it's like, I don't know if I want that type of experience to happen. Like it's sort of, I realized it's like, oh, I don't know if that's necessarily what I'm here for, is like that, to have one of those. Because if that happened, then I would have to, it would keep me up at night wondering what exactly I heard. But it was a lot of fun just to sort of be out there and, have FLIRs and stuff. That was sort of my Finding Bigfoot dreams were coming true.
So, right. I mean,
it was like camping, but stepped up a little bit. Yeah, I do want to say, I think Mike is actually in the chat because he posted tree rats.
Oh, cool.
That's what he kept saying whenever we would get something on the therm. He's like, tree rats. That's definitely Mike, Tactical Bigfoot Research. What's going on, Mike?
Yeah. Hey, Mike. The thing to point out about Andy too is Andy. So for like viewers who don't know, Andy has been coming on STM shoots since 2016 when he was, how old were you in 2013? 13 years old. He came on the Boggy Creek Monster shoot. So Andy's been a part of STM for almost as long as we've been around. Probably, I mean, as long or longer than we've been around. Like he's been part of the whole crew. So he's grown up around this in a way, but I don't think I had seen him. Yeah, I don't think I'd seen him thrown into the deep end of like the research pool until this trip. So for me, it was kind of hilarious because I just like watching Andy react to things. And this whole trip was like watching Andy react to stuff. I mean, like just on a personal level, I have to say something that and I know I said this to you, Alex, after we did On the Trail of UFOs, but one of the coolest things for me has been seeing the like full circle aspect of On the Trail of, where On the Trail of began with On the Trail of Champ. And, you know, and then we worked together a little bit during On the Trail of UFOs, but I think more like with On the Trail of UFOs, I think you were there almost as a guide. Whereas with this one, it felt a little more like we were like on a team together or something, you know, like we were doing, you had the FS7, you were off doing stuff. And so it's just cool to like see Andy stepping into like a cinematography role at the age of 17.
Oh yeah.
You know, after growing up around this stuff, and it's cool to like see him picking up the camera and knowing what he's doing now. And then
that was really cool for me to see too. Is just like you guys are doing an interview, right?
Mhm.
And it's like Andy was on the beat. He knew exactly what to do. You didn't have to tell him like do this, do that, every little thing. He kind of just picked up on it, and that was really cool for me to see. You know, somebody who's used to kind of doing interviews and just seeing Andy really step into that role. I agree. It was really cool to see. And you guys worked well together. There was never like any real moments of tension or anything like that I saw.
We got into a lot of fights in the car.
At least when I wasn't there. Maybe I was off on Abear Road or something. But
no, but the other thing was just like having you like be up. It was just it's strange to like 5 years in with STM, you start to see these little like beats, these little like story beats happen, and one of them is that like you started on the trail of Champ, and now like we basically just made a movie that is like where we're both working on the same movie together. It's just cool. Like it's been
in the same region. Like that's what's so crazy. It's like if you were to take a puzzle piece, if you were to put a map out and put STM Productions as like where things have happened, you'd have On the Trail of Champ. Now you're going to have this kind of right next to it. And then you're heading down Appalachia with all the other productions. It's like they all have a link geographically in a way, which I think is part of the story too.
Yeah, it's so crazy to see. But I had a lot of like geek out moments on this trip. And especially over the course of the week, just watching you guys work and how everything was working out. It was cool to see that. Tuesday was okay. So I had to finish up the Monday night. I woke up it would be Tuesday morning at like, we went to bed at like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I woke up at around 3:30. First of all, I was freezing cold. Like I was shivering, and everything in my tent felt wet. It wasn't like it was pouring rain. It wasn't wet. Like there was nothing on the roof of the tent or anything. There was no water inside the tent, but I reached down to pick up I think it was the handy cam actually. And I just felt water, and I was like, well, that's not good. I was like, that's not good.
We got some rain that night.
Yeah, we got hammered. And then so I got not hammered. We got wet. There was really wet.
Kind of what we talking about here.
So I like reached over, and Adam's asleep on the floor, and I was like, hey, we got to get like stuff packed up and out to the car because like everything's getting wet. And so at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, Adam and I had to pack up all the gear and then lug it like, what do you think, like 300 yards out of the woods?
It was a good 3-4 minute walk up to the car.
Yeah, like we had to lug it out of the woods in the pouring rain. Got it all in the car, and then we were delirious because it was late, and we laughed about something hysterically for like 10 minutes, and then I just passed out. And the next thing I know, I'm waking up. It's like 7:30, and I'm sitting in the driver's seat of this Suburban, like, you know, aching and completely confused about where we were. And thus began Tuesday of On the Trail of Bigfoot, the journey.
I feel like to give that story a little bit more credibility, that wasn't like a path back and forth from the campsite or anything. This was like a serious trail, like over rocks and
mud.
It was muddy. Yeah, with some muddy spots. Yeah. It was like a path in the sense that it's like a hiking trail. So it wasn't like a clear path. Yeah, there was roots you could have easily tripped over, that sort of stuff. But we were kind of on a hill. We were sort of away from the main camp where everyone was. Mm-hmm. And I was like, if it rains tonight, we're going to get wet. And I was, I was shocked that we were like, nothing was wet on the inside in the morning. I'm like, I don't know how you guys got it all. It was really weird.
It was just our gear though. Nothing inside the tent was wet. My sleeping bag was dry. It was all the gear had accrued this condensation. And I just I had probably $8,000 in gear in our tent. I was like, I got to get this out of here before we scuttle the entire project before it's even began. So, but yeah, Tuesday was Whitehall Day, which I don't remember exactly the whole gist of that day. I don't remember what we did. I know it
was pretty interesting. There was a lot of running around. Well, because what we did was we had a bunch of interviews to do, which we did kind of right by the Champlain Canal, that sort of area, because we want to do it outside, obviously social distancing, whatever. I went off then to film B-roll on Abear Road and just kind of drove around, went to the Vermont border, that whole area. And then we met up and we had the Joe's Pizza, the Bigfoot Pizza, whatever. We just did a bunch of interviews, and then we met up again with Steve. We went out to the Poultney River, walked around there at night. But yeah, it was a very humid day. It was like 90s. My brother and I drove up to Lake Champlain too. And we got up by the river, because it's right out of town. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of cool, and it was really cool seeing just Whitehall again. I mean, I'd only been there once.
That was sort of the big interview day too. I think that was the most. Oh no, actually, that wasn't the most interviews we did. But we interviewed Emily Flair. We interviewed a witness who's anonymous. I think he's going by John. You'll see him, but he's in his mask, and he didn't really want his face revealed. But it was a great story. Were you even there for that, Alex? I can't remember.
I came in right towards the end as he was leaving, so I didn't really hear the story. So I'm excited to hear that the first time. But
it's a really cool road crossing story. So
right. So from what I understand, it was the first time he'd really shared his story, or it's never been publicized before for the most part.
Yeah, so he told that story, and then we interviewed Paul Bartholomew back at his house, which, I mean...
That was amazing.
If you want to see Alex nerding out on a supreme level, I've got footage of Alex with the biggest grin on his face going through Paul Bartholomew's library.
Man, it was crazy.
So going through Paul Bartholomew's library is one of the highlights of the trip, because that was so cool. It's
it really was
my dream come true. Just all these books and all these original t-shirts and original artwork, anything you can imagine connected to that region from a cryptozoology perspective. He probably has something connected to that. He kept bringing out footprints and things like that, and it was
I think your dad and Mark and I were nerding out probably the most, because you guys all went out, and then we stayed in there for a little bit towards the end, and then Paul started pulling out his champ stuff, which of course
there's Alex grinning for all the people at home. He's so happy.
It was amazing.
He started bringing out champ stuff, and it was amazing.
Well, it was just amazing. You look everywhere on the wall, you'd see him with a letter to Bob Gimlin, something about Monsters of the North Woods, all that kind of stuff that he's worked on with his brother. His brother wrote a fantastic champ book, which I used as a lot of my research material when I did on the Trail of Champs. So it was just amazing. I'm having him on the show, I think, in August. I can't wait to just talk to him longer. And such a nice guy. I mean, really just class act. Paul's always been a class act, for those that are familiar with his research. And it was amazing. Like Andy said, it was a dream come true. It was like we're in a museum, basically. That's what it felt like.
The highlights of that for me, because I've been in there 3 times now, and I'm obsessed for some reason with the way that looks on camera. That something about that room looks great. I don't know what it is.
X-Files room or something.
Yeah, I've shot it a couple times and haven't really gotten to use too much of it. In Beast of Whitehall, we only used 2 or 3 of the shots in there. But one of the shots I know that was in Beast of Whitehall is him holding that cast that has the stick in it. That's one of my favorite track casts. I just think that's so cool. And so 2 of the things, the 2 coolest things that I found this time were the Eric Miner illustrations that hang on the wall. And I think I just posted a screen grab of those last night. Those are the originals. And that's the other thing right there, the Monsters of the North Woods first printing. So I bought a Monsters of the North Woods copy of that book. It's out of print. It's extremely expensive.
Yep.
To find a used copy is like $90. I got one, and I got it signed by Paul and Bruce. Yeah. And but that first printing's crazy because it's huge, and I didn't realize, like, I didn't have the first print. I wish I had the first printing, but apparently he said that actual first printing is like $300-400 if you can find used copies. So those that was really awesome, like getting to see his collection again and all that stuff. I don't remember what happened after Paul's interview.
We went to
got pizza,
the Manor, or whatever that was. That's where we went.
Yeah, we went to Skeen Manor. I think, Alex, you went out to Abear, and
we were out. I think I don't know if it was before or after. I don't know. We drove around. We were at Abear, and then actually, we did drive to Abear or something. It doesn't matter. Lake Champlain, whatever. Then we went and got the pizza. We all made it. I can't speak today. We met up and got pizza, and then we took it from there. And then after pizza, I think we reconvened with Steve, and that's when we went down to the Poultney River.
And that for me is like probably top two,
and Abear.
2-3 moments on the trip. Yeah, it was going down to the Poultney River because I'd been to that spot, Carver's Falls. I always go there when we're there. I have photos of like my wife and I there when we premiered Beast of Whitehall. I have photos of me there both times I shot Beast of Whitehall. So I always make sure to go to Carver's Falls, but I had never taken that trail down to the Poultney River. And the reason that's so special is because the theory is that the Beast of Whitehall was in Abear Field because it was following the river. Because if you look at the map, the river wraps around Abear Road, and it comes at one point, it comes out on the other side of the field where it would have been. And just getting down there by the river and following it down this trail in pitch black, by the way, like it's completely nighttime. We're wearing headlamps to be able to see, and we were on a pretty steep hill to get down to the river, and then you had to climb back out the same
like
hill.
A gorge. It was really like a gorge. I mean, it reminded me a lot of some terrain in West Virginia.
Yeah,
especially
it did. Yeah,
like how like the drop off was on either side. I mean, if you slipped, you were falling 50-60 feet probably to your death down there, especially if it was dark.
Yeah. So it just, that for me, to have that geography cemented and be able to see where certain things were and how they align, it all fit with what I learned just visually on the helicopter ride on Thursday. Like I talked about it in the final like monologue of the movie or whatever, but like the biggest takeaway for me of this whole trip was that geography, like seeing those things fit into place like pieces of a puzzle, like why the Beast of Whitehall would have been on Abear Road or in that field that night, where it would have come from, why Abear Road and why right there. It all makes sense when you look at the area, when you start to see the area and where the mountains spill into the valleys and where the forests kind of come to a stop and where the rivers run. Well,
even just like the area we were at with Steve and those guys, how it's kind of between Lake George and Lake Champlain. Mm-hmm. And it's a pretty, kind of wild area driving out there. You could get there. You could walk there to Whitehall. My brother and I drove up this one path to right outside of Whitehall as we were waiting on our pizza. And it was just a pretty gnarly area. I'm like, there could be anything just wandering around in here. Yeah. And then being on Abear at night was so cool. We had that little low fog, I think, kind of hanging over. Yeah. And there was this one point where Steve said something along the lines of, this is it. This is like the Bluff Creek of the East Coast or something along those lines, like ground zero for Bigfoot on the East Coast. And that was just so true. And we're all, there's 3 cars pulled over and we're all just kind of taking it in. We did a little filming there too, but man, it was just, there's not really a whole lot there anymore on Abear Road. And there's houses in the daytime. When I was there, we had a Amish kid ride by on a horse as I was filming. But I mean, at night, it's still creepy. Even 1977. I mean, that's so many years ago. It's still just as creepy from when the incident happened in the 70s.
Andy, was that your first time at Abear?
Yeah, that at night was my first time at Abear Road. In my previous trip, I had been to the Abear Road sign, and that was as far down as I had been. So to like be there and see the field at night, sort of like really you could put yourself in the shoes of those original witnesses. And it's honestly, I think, one of the few places I've been where you still feel like it could happen right then and there, and that it like actually could have happened there, and that's not discrediting anywhere else I've been, but it's sort of that it could still, like it did now, is very rare in all of this.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's sort of going away with like a house and things like that, but still that field is, and that field and where it is unlike anything else.
Yeah, it's like, even though it's more built up than it was in the 70s, it's really not that built up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the crazy thing is that field really in 5 years hasn't. The road has changed. I think it's been more developed. You can see new housing all along that road, and especially back behind where the telephone pole used to be. They sold the right side of that field, and now they build a house back there, and that's super depressing to me, because inevitably, in my opinion, they're gonna sell that field, and that's gonna be developed. Like, that's what I'm waiting to see happen, because that's what they do with anything open.
Yeah.
So that was sad, but I was glad to get out there at night and find that the vibe is still the same. As stupid as that might sound, the vibe is still the same. I've spent, of the times that I've been in Whitehall and in the area filming, I've spent more time out on Aber Road at that exact spot than any place in Whitehall.
Right.
The first day I ever went to Aber Road, we were there for like 11 hours. We parked. We parked and we filmed B-roll all afternoon. And then we stayed there until like 12 o'clock at night. We actually did like stargazing and stuff, and did like, we weren't doing a night ops, but we sat there and like, just to enjoyed the area. Whenever I go back there, I try to go out there at night. It's something special. This time was the first time I've seen it with the high grass.
Yeah,
and
right.
It bugged me because I couldn't see the back of the field anymore. Like, you couldn't really see the full scope of the field. But then I started thinking about this recently. Like, that sighting took place in August, right? Like the 1976 stuff that took place in August. We were there in early July. Had he mowed that field? Had he like, had he actually cut that field in August, or was that like the length of the grass? Because if it's that length, that actually makes the story a lot creepier, because you can't see what's coming toward you beyond 10 feet into that field, if that far. Like, it was very high grass. The other thing I thought was cool was getting to show Andy I don't know if I showed it to you, Alex, but the hole in the trees where Brian at the end of Beast of Whitehall walks across and up into the other field across the street, that hole's still there. So I was able to show Andy and Mark and be like, this is where Brian walked, like right through this. It's still here. Like, this cut in the trees is still there. So
yeah, I saw you guys talking about it. Yeah, it's really the legacy there. I mean, I think that was, at least from what I could tell, just your reactions to being back there and kind of reliving those memories, but creating new ones and creating a new, even though this is just a piece of the journey as a documentary, it's definitely an important piece, because as I felt, Whitehall's almost a gateway to the Adirondacks and the wider area. It's like, that's, it's one of the most well-known areas in the East Coast for Bigfoot, but it's just like the little portal to the vastness of the Adirondacks.
I mean, it's interesting you use the word gateway too, because I think for a lot of people, it's the gateway to the Bigfoot subject. Like Mike Ian, who was with us, he might still be in the chat. As far as I understand it, and I could be wrong, but I believe he told me like Beast of Whitehall, and Beast of Whitehall is just telling the story of the Abear incident. So what he's saying is the Abear incident is what got him into the Bigfoot subject, like what really pushed him into the field of investigating it. So I think for a lot of people to hear those stories, especially the stories about like Brian Gosselin and the other law enforcement officers who saw Bigfoot that night, like, I think that credibility of those witnesses for a lot of people is what gets them into the subject.
Yeah, he is here. Sorry, Andy. I want to read this one thing real quick, but I think Ted is in the chat. I was confused about this comment at first, but it says KSG is in the house. I think that's because the type of shotgun he had is the Keltec KSG. And so I remember because he was showing us it, but that is Ted. And he says, interesting note how it got eerily quiet on Buck Mountain that evening. Yeah, so that was the second night we were there in Buck Mountain.
Yeah, we got to talk about that as soon as Andy talks.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
That is one thing I want to talk about, is how creepily quiet it was.
Not to backtrack too much, but talking about how you showed us like the hole where it goes into the field, I thought that was one of those interesting full circle moments to me, because I remember seeing that in Beast of Whitehall, where it's that where you guys follow him and then you hear Seth ask like the question and then he answers it. I thought that was really cool, and that's sort of more and more of what STM has become, you know, with now Seth being on camera and all that. It was sort of like back then it was like, oh, I know that voice, and like that's cool, like almost an Easter egg type thing. But now that's more like what Small Town Monsters has become, is following these people. And it was really cool to see that spot and like realize that's where you were and that's where all that had happened.
Yeah, I had a lot of emotional moments where I got like weirdly emotional, and we'll talk about one with Mount Hadley. But the Abear incident, the Abear Road stop hit me in a different way than I would have expected. I didn't get like nostalgic emotional, but I definitely got like I got a weird vibe out there, a little bit different from any of the other places we've been. We keep saying full circle, but there's a lot of, I think part of this journey, as silly as that might sound, really is like the full circle aspect of it. And something I noticed today that's really interesting on the Trail of Bigfoot, the first one, I guess you could say on the Trail of Bigfoot, the legend, but it's really all of that first season is very much tied back into Minerva. Right. And, you know, you've got the Barbara Galloway scene and you've got all these callbacks to Minerva. And this whole thing is kind of like a callback to Whitehall. And it's kind of weird that like those are the first two STM movies. And 5 years later, like the first season of On the Trail of Bigfoot is a callback to Minerva. And the second season, if you want to call it that, is a callback to Beast of Whitehall. But I mean, it makes perfect sense.
That's really cool. I hadn't thought of that at all. I'm like geeking out about it now, but you're right, because I mean, the first On the Trail of is you talking about researching early on in Ohio, and that's like how it starts. And this is, I'm sorry, I just genuinely think that's really cool, realizing that.
Yeah, that wasn't planned either.
So many connections. Like we said, even with Champ, just how that's in the area and how that was like my first kind of working with you guys as well. It really is in like a full circle way. And
I believe there's some paranormal investigators who would call this a synchronicity. Sorry,
we slipped into another dimension as this was going on.
That night, so we did that night ops. But what we were talking about with Buck Mountain is that night we did something a little different, where we split into two teams, and Alex was in one team that was back at the camp, and I think Andy was there too, right?
Yeah,
Andy, so you were at the camp. And then there was myself and Adam, and then two others. I think Mike and Austin, maybe. I can't remember who the other guy was.
I think it was Austin. Yeah.
The four of us went maybe 75 yards. It wasn't that far, like 75, 100 yards outside of camp, and we were therming down into the valley. And they were doing call blasts back at the camp, and then we were
creepy baby sounds.
Yeah, and nothing. So. I don't want to get into what happened.
Of course.
We'll save that.
Well, that's because there was a question in the comments somebody had asked. If I can find it real quick, somebody had said, without giving away too much, what was there anything that happened? And I think we obviously are not really going to talk about that, but
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Andy.
That night something interesting happened. I called back and forth the Bard Owl. That was cool.
Oh yeah,
I genuinely geeked out about that. That was a lot of fun. It was because it was far off in the distance, and then I did some Bigfoot thing. I think it was like a tooth pop wood knock thing. And then it came closer. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far into what happened, but I will say like the weirdest thing about Buck Mountain. So one thing, before I get to this, we saw a ton of deer up there. Like I can't overstate this enough. Like we saw massive amounts of deer on Buck Mountain, including just on the first night when we drove up, we saw deer everywhere. But this second night, the weirdest thing about it was how quiet it was. Just unbelievably eerily quiet. To to where and it was bad on Monday night. I don't think there was much sound at all, but Tuesday night was way
rainy.
worse.
It
Way
was like
worse.
raining on Monday, and then Tuesday there was just nothing. You couldn't hear anything except for us.
Yeah, it was just, I mean, really it enhanced the claustrophobia that I was already kind of feeling being in that place. It just, everything was so quiet, ungodly quiet.
Yeah, and back at camp, I overheard some of the people in the research group talking about how they had never heard it that quiet there before. And this is an area which this group frequents. So
yeah,
I'm just saying this group because I don't know their name. What's the official name of their group? Does anyone know?
I can't remember. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't think it's Nezra.
Way to put us on the spot, Mike. If you're in there, drop it in the comments.
Mike or Ted, you guys are. Yeah, they're both in here.
Ted, I posted photos on the official SDM page that include you. Some screen grabs. So check those out. Yeah. So that was Tuesday. Well, I don't want to get too far into what happened that night. Tuesday was also notable because I had a really decent night's sleep. They're
the Squatch Detective Field Investigation Team. Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So Steve calls the Squatch Detective. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that night I had a great night's sleep, and Wednesday was the day from hell. No, I mean, like Wednesday was probably one of my favorite days, but it was supposed to, I think the way I initially introduced the concept of Wednesday to everyone was like, this is our fun adventure day.
Fun hike day. It was going to be a fun hike.
Our fun hike day. And so we picked who picked Mount Hadley?
I think I did because it was very close to the area we were going to be staying. And I have like a hiking app. So we just basically in the parking lot of the hotel, we decided we're going to go to Mount Hadley. There was a couple other options, waterfall further away, but I was like, oh, it's, whatever, 3-something mile. Yeah. As Mike is saying, it's a little mountain, really isn't that big, but it was a hot day and it took us a while to get up there.
That's something that I want to ask you about, because you're a hiker and you do this way more than any of us, especially me. But as an experienced hiker, how tough was that trail for you? Or how did you perceive the difficulty of that trail?
That was definitely intermediate to easy. In terms of because
shut up, Alex. Make it look like we survived something brutal.
Well, it was I will say it was very hot, and the trails were wet because it had been raining a couple hours before. So in terms of a grade, we were getting into the 30% grade in terms of a steepness. So it was it definitely wasn't a walk in the park, and it was a mile something up. And it had some pretty amazing views in the tower at the top. It was great.
Yeah, so that was the part where and this is going to be a part of On the Trail of Bigfoot. The journey is about the fact that we're all coming out of this coronavirus thing, right? And I mean, some people are claiming we're not coming out of it, but the fact is, from March until May, we were told we couldn't leave our homes. Into June even. And so for a lot of us, we spent more time than ever sort of sitting around our house or our office or our backyard or whatever. And for me, there was a weird moment, climbing up that miserable friggin' hill and reaching the top of that, where I had a complete emotional breakdown. I reached the summit, and I knew Andy was somewhere behind me with a camera, and I was like, I hope he's not filming this, because I was sitting on the edge of the mountain with my legs dangling over it, and I'm sitting there. I still don't know if you shot it. I really
don't think I did, because I just remember seeing you go to the far right and pass out.
That's what happened. I was sitting.
I'll give him his space.
Yeah, I was sitting on the far right side of this mountain, and I had an emotional moment, and it was cool. It was cool because more than anything, it wasn't because I was miserable. It's because I realized I was healthy. I was able to go up the stupid mountain. I was able to see the view that was unbelievable, to see that those rain clouds coming in over the mountains on the other side, and hear the rain across the valley and all this stuff. And there's a very philosophical edge to On the Trail of Bigfoot: The Journey that I don't think has been a part of any of our other films or anything, and it's more about the idea of Bigfoot as the reason we go out and interact with nature, and the excuse even to take us out into our natural world.
Definitely.
And I think that connected with me in that moment more than I realized. Like, I knew that's something Mark and I have been talking about for a while, as being the the what the movie's actually about. Like, if there's something this is about, it's that. Like, that's
Definitely.
the undercurrent. And in that moment, it was like very real. Like, that this is what the reason I'm out here, and I am finally out of my house or my office or whatever, is because I am making a movie about Bigfoot, and Bigfoot got me out of that, even if it is just for a few days and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I mean, I think the timing played a big role in it. It really did, and I think that kind of not made it what it is, but it contributed to it, because like you said, all of us have been home for a while. I mean, I've just been moving around here pretty much in New England. That was my first time really out in a while, in that sort of, in like a trip sort of way. And just the fact that, we were all there for Bigfoot, that's what put us out there, was pretty remarkable. And as Mike is saying, next time he goes with kidney stones, this guy, he made it up the mountain, while trying to pass a stone. So we got to give some props to Mike on that.
Yeah, I didn't know if we were allowed to talk about that, so I didn't want to mention it. But Mike
brought it up. So
Mike literally climbed the mountain with kidney stones. So, so that was probably one of the most impressive aspects of the entire trip for me, was seeing Mike come up, because I kept saying to you guys, I don't think Mike should be doing this. Like, I think someone needs to say to Mike, go. Like, you probably should go down to the bottom and take it easy. But seeing him come all the way to the top with all the stuff he was dealing with, I really I cannot wait to get into editing this, because I think the different little interpersonal stories are going to be really great. And that's just like one aspect of it that'll probably, I'm going to make sure that Mike's kidney stones are a major player on the Trail of Bigfoot: The Journey.
Yeah.
And that night, after we survived the Mount Hadley hike, Andy got sick eating George Henry's and threw up in the middle of the night. But I slept through it. So,
well, we almost had raw chicken. A lot of us had some issues with chicken there at this restaurant.
Having said that, it's still my favorite restaurant in New York. I don't want to hear any slander.
So good.
I don't want to hear any slander against my favorite New York restaurant.
I still have that picture of you eating the burger with like that like just grin of complete satisfaction. I mean,
did we do anything else that night? I mean, other than buy towels at a Dollar General?
So there you have it. So, but yeah, just one more thing I wanted to add. I think was so interesting was, like you said, philosophically speaking, we were all brought to this place. We're meeting up with people like Steve and all the other folks that we interviewed and met because of Bigfoot. And a lot of people just laugh at the concept of Bigfoot. Like, we're out here, making connections with people, incredible sort of experiences that I don't think many other people even think about, or it's kind of on the radar just because of something that supposedly doesn't exist.
Right.
And this, then the filmmaking obviously that goes into it. And I really think that there's just going to be a lot of that, like you said, just personal storyline in this, and the personal experiences that we had, because it really was about the journey. It wasn't just talking to the witnesses and all the people that were involved. It was like really seeing it kind of through our perspective in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Just say one more thing about the mountain, not to cut that off, but like when we got to the top, when you get to the top, there's a fire tower.
Yeah.
And when we got to the top, I climbed that tower like fairly easily, and I don't like have a fear of the heights or anything, but I'm a little cautious. But I just went like straight up and sat down and like looked around, and it was even more amazing than the view you get when you like hit the summit. And it was just like this like realization that this hour-and-a-half hike straight, what felt like straight up a mountain, was like all worth it. It was like the prettiest thing I'd ever seen. And I mean, we hadn't even seen the high peaks yet, but it was like just seeing this, and there's lakes and there's like swamps you can see down there. It was just like completely worth it in that moment.
Yeah. I mean, I've said for years since Beast of Whitehall that the Adirondacks is one of my favorite places on earth. And that was almost solely based on my experiences in Wells and Whitehall. And now I mean, this might be my favorite place on earth. Like this just might be where I want to be, because even in the last 2 days, just being home, I can't stop thinking about it. Like I keep casting myself back into some of those locations. And Alex has like the White Mountains near him, which is also gorgeous. So I'm sure and it's where he lives. So he's got that personal connection to it. Probably kind of like how I am with like Cuyahoga Valley National Park.
Definitely. Like I love the White Mountains, but at the same time, Lake Champlain is one of my favorite places in the world. Like I love being there, and just knowing that this area, especially the high peaks, is just right over the water where I'm usually looking, as I talked about earlier, is really amazing. And that's definitely, especially when we flew over some of those high peaks, I'm thinking to myself, like, I cannot wait to come up and hike Mount Marcy and Whiteface, even just some of these ones that we got to see from the air. I mean, it's like right next to that place that I'm so familiar with that I really had no idea about.
Well, you gotta become a 46er.
Yeah, that's the next step.
Yeah. That's like that documentary. I can't say enough. Like that documentary is really gorgeous. If you can seek out, there's a documentary called The 46ers, all about the people who hike the 46 peaks of the Adirondacks. If you can find that doc, it's on Vimeo on demand. That's how I found it. I bought it. It's the crazy thing about it is the guy who shot the B-roll for like the helicopter. That's our pilot. That's the guy who piloted. That's the guy who actually flew for that documentary. So if you can find that documentary on Vimeo on demand, it's absolutely gorgeous.
He was great.
Yeah, dude is super cool.
So that's how we started out our Thursday, actually, which was coincidentally my birthday. So what I think we should say is that, we originally tried to do this helicopter flight Tuesday and then Wednesday, and we had rain every day. It was rain on and off. The weather was like a real pain the whole time, but Thursday was supposed to be the only day where it was just going to be amazing the whole day. So we went for it on Thursday. One thing I did want to mention even before we got into that was the fact that, originally, even with the whole coronavirus thing, how that kind of was spurred on this trip a bit. Originally, we were supposed to go to Maine for the second half of this documentary, and that coronavirus sort of derailed that. And I almost think it's a good thing because it gave us more of a chance to see the Adirondacks. I mean, the helicopter flight alone may have not have happened because of that.
I think we can't understate the importance of that part of this, because so originally it was 2 days in the Adirondacks, followed by 1 day. Wednesday was supposed to be our driving to Maine day, and stopping in Massachusetts and interviewing the Squatchachusetts guys, and then heading on up to Portland and interviewing Michelle and Lauren. And then on Thursday, we were supposed to drive to Maine, or to Millinocket, Maine. Yeah. And then Friday was a half day in Millinocket and then start for home. So the trip got derailed the week before we were supposed to leave, right? Like 3 days before we were supposed to leave.
We were going back and forth for like 3 days in a row just because
didn't know what to do.
Enforcements in Maine. Maine was like one of the strictest states now in terms of letting people in from New Hampshire and Vermont, coincidentally, were exempt. So I would have been fine. It's everybody else that would have been either having to quarantine for 14 days or show a negative COVID test. And it had to be a viral test, not an antibody test. So we ended up completely scuttling the main part of the trip. And yeah, like you said, like there's no doubt in my mind this is the way this project should have gone, because the things we would have lost are not worth losing to add a day and a half basically in Maine. Right. And I think Maine would have been amazing, but I think that'll be better done at like a time
as its own project. Like having looked into Maine, like there's more there than what we would have been able to cover, and there's obviously more to the Adirondacks than what we were going to cover in 2 days. So this opened it up. So we were still there on Thursday morning, and we were able to do the helicopter trek up into the high peaks. And yeah, like that was my first. I guess that was the moment where when you really see when he points. So we're flying over all the foothills, right? And I'm like, This is unbelievable. You're shooting the B-roll, and you're saying to yourself, like, this is beautiful. This is like mountainous and majestic, and all the expansive and all this stuff. And then you see these silhouettes in the distance, and it looks like the Rockies or something. And he's like, that's that's the high peaks. He's like, that's the high peaks, you know? And
It was unreal.
that was the moment where I was like, holy crap, like we have this here on the East Coast. Like this is, and he asked me like, what do you want to do? That's Mount Marcy. That's the biggest point in New York.
Like
and then
5,000 something feet.
Yeah, and then next to it is another mountain, and he's like, "Do you want me to go over them, or like, what do you want to do? Do you want me to skirt them?" And I was like, "Go between them."
I remember you saying that. So this helicopter, folks, it was a 4-seater, and there were no doors, basically aside from the pilot door. We chose to do that for footage sake, so we could get. So like the wind was whipping. My beard was literally whipping me in my face the whole time. It was still amazing, and we had our cameras on gimbals, and every time we try and put it towards the edge, the gimbal would just go crazy. I think Adam had the handy cams, so it was a little different, but man, it was like, for me, it was amazing because I'm seeing these mountains, and there was still even a little patch of snow up on Mount Marcy, and we could see all these hikers down below waving.
Yeah, hikers are coming up and like waving at us on the.
It was like, for me, like this really reminded me a lot of the White Mountains, and from what I've heard, just geologically, the Adirondacks and the White Mountains are actually very similar. They were once part of the same exact chain. So in between, now you have Lake Champlain and you have the Green Mountains. So it just, like, for me, like I was saying, it made me want to say, okay, this is a place I'm going to hike in the future and explore more. But like just flying over it, that's something I've never done, flying over mountains. We were like probably like couple hundred feet from some of the summits at a given time. It was like, man, Adam and I were joking around like, this is what it must feel like to be like a chopper gunner, you know, like on a helicopter, like a machine gun hanging out the side. I mean, it was just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and so our pilot realized. So our pilot is also a photographer and videographer. So what he was doing is, as he was flying, he was watching my camera. He was watching my monitor, and so he saw that like the footage he was getting going around the summit of Marcy was working, because like everything else is kind of like shaky. It was hard to get it like just right, but he saw that was working. So he started flying these figure eights around the mountains. And that was when I finally, like, that was when my stomach bottomed out. And I was like, oh shoot. Like, cause I had made it like an hour into this flight without getting sick, and I get motion sickness pretty easily. And I was fine the entire time. But once he started doing these, he also was doing these like drop offs, where he's going over the mountain, then just like flying down the side of these mountains. And you're getting like, occasionally you're getting buffeted by the wind coming across the mountains and stuff. And that was the
gnarly sunburn from that.
Right. That was the only time I started getting a little queasy, but I regained my stuff. Honestly, at some point I just like, you know what? I'm done filming. Like I knew we had at least like 20, 30 shots on my camera alone that were going to be usable, like little 12, 15 second clips. And I was like, I'm just going to enjoy this. Cause like I paid for us to be up here. We need to, you know, we got everything we needed done. You're going to reach the limit of what you can use. Like, just enjoy it. Stop staring at the screen and fumbling with the gimbal, and just try to enjoy the moment. So like there was a point where I just sat the gimbal down and enjoyed the flight home. But it's
like an hour 20, something like that. We were up there.
And the biggest thing about this day, you can't understate how massive this day is. This day began with a 70-minute flight over the high peaks of New York, and ended in Western Massachusetts with us out in the woods on a 3-mile round trip hike through the dark. Yeah. Like it was in STM shoot scheduling days. I don't think we'll top this, because we did this helicopter flight. Then we drove 2 hours south to Kinderhook and spent a day with Bruce, and learned all about the Kinderhook creature stories, and interviewed members of his family, and got to film what might be the last footage shot at the actual house where this stuff happened, because he's selling the house. And then wrapped up the whole thing in Western Massachusetts with John Wilk and Dave and the Squatchachusetts gang on this crazy hike.
It was such a day, right? And it was so amazing just going to Kinderhook too. I mean, I was talking about The Sopranos, obviously, because that's one of my favorite shows, and there's a connection to that. But being there and, you know, hearing Bruce's story, and then obviously Bruce has the connection to Paul with, you know, literary stuff they've done in the past. So that was like almost like the Whitehall connection there. And then he was telling me like he really enjoyed the Champs series, and I'm like, I was pretty flattered, honestly, because hearing somebody like that who's been into this stuff for such a long time saying that, and then being able to go to Western Massachusetts, which is an area that I've never really spent much time in, even though it was just dark and we basically went into the woods, to be with John and Dave, who I think are probably some of my favorite Bigfoot researchers out there, and just the nicest guys possible. Dave's
a king among men.
So
king
great.
Among men.
That was probably my favorite show, even on this show, was having them on. And just every time I hang out with them, I mean, John let us borrow his 2 FLIR units that we had throughout the whole trip. I mean, that like for me was just incredible. Like, they were just such nice guys, and just hanging out with the rest of the crew and everything. And I've hung out with them before, but it was really nice to finally be out in the area too, where John has his encounter, which he talked about on the show, and just kind of seeing full circle and some of the other stories that he was talking about. It was just amazing.
I have to say my favorite thing about the Western Massachusetts thing was realizing we were in the Appalachian mountain range again. Like it just was fun to realize that it was like being home again or something. Like you're in the Appalachian.
The trail goes through there and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, I don't, to go back a little bit, when we were interviewing Bruce, or when we were at Bruce's family's house, like they have a larger property. I remember him talking about On the Trail of Champ. And I don't know if you had talked to him yet, Alex, but I remember he had said like, oh, it's the best I've seen on the subject. And like the second we got out of that house, I like rushed to talk to you because you weren't in the building. It's like, I want to be the person to tell you this. It's like, he just said it's the best he's seen on the subject. And it was a really cool moment.
I know, that was so weird. I think I was flying the drone around there, and I was just flying up and seeing how much woods there actually were there. Because I was thinking, Kinderhook, it's kind of, more in a, not civilized, but, more built up area. Like it's probably not going to be anything like what we just flew over. I mean, we just flew over the high peaks. Like it's tough to beat that. Yet I'm flying over with the drone, and it really was a lot of woods, even in Kinderhook. So I can't imagine it's changed all that much since that time.
I think it's like Minerva of New York. Like that's what it reminded me of. It was like New York's Minerva.
The rolling hills.
Yeah. And the case and everything reminds me of Minerva too. So that's what I mean. Like within the context of On the Trail of Bigfoot, the journey, you're going to have this little like mini STM movie, like also in the middle of it. And I guess that's perfectly fitting given that I didn't want to revisit the Whitehall case because we've already made a movie about it. So it's important to have the Whitehall case in the film and the A-Bear incident and all that for, because of its historical importance to New York, but I didn't want to go back into that story. So now we have a whole other story that's just as fascinating as Whitehall to tell. But yeah, the Squatchachusetts guys were awesome. Getting to be up there in Massachusetts was really cool. Surreal too, just because like it seemed like there's just so much travel.
So much in one day. I mean, because if you look at just even we were right outside of Whitehall when we started that helicopter flight, and we flew to where it would be the next day, which from the Squatchachusetts, where we were with John and Dave, was like 3-hour drive with a car, and we made it, in 30 minutes with a helicopter. Just so much there. And I love the fact that this whole project, I mean, it's about the Adirondacks primarily, but Whitehall plays a part in it. And then you have this Kinderhook and Western Massachusetts kind of making little cameos that I think probably maybe will open up stuff for the future. Who knows? But just kind of, I'm really glad we got to be with the Squatchachusetts guys and get that little part in there too.
I think part of what being out with the Squatchachusetts guys that sort of blew my mind and was really cool was we went from the Bigfoot capital of New York to like the Bigfoot capital of Massachusetts in a day. It was like the place to go in Massachusetts, at least to my knowledge from talking to those guys, was Savoy State, whatever. Savoy, I don't know. But being there and like him talk and John mentioning it, like it's the second largest state forest in the state, and it's sort of like the place to go, and being sort of from like Kinderhook to there in a day, sort of, I don't think I processed it in the moment, but looking back on it, it's in a day is ridiculous. It's like go from a place that could almost be its own, movie, and like we're talking about it, like seems like it almost will be, to like another like super squatchy location is like mind blowing. And how close those places are. I mean, yeah, we did spend a few hours in the car, but still, all those woods are connected somehow. And
that was a big part of it, was how they're, what you said, Alex, I think in the final kind of like monologue that we had, or a conversation where you were talking about how you could travel through those forests.
Pretty much like unmolested, I guess.
Yeah, like without leaving. Yeah,
and even just driving back. So we drove back into New York to stay in Troy, New York, which is about an hour from where we were in Savoy. There's that little sliver of Vermont that we drove through. And not far from there is Bennington. If we had just gone 20 minutes north, we would have been in Bennington, Vermont, which is famous for the Bennington Triangle, Bigfoot stuff there. So it just tells you how this area, even though it's like the border of New England and New York, that whole area, whether we're talking Hudson Valley for UFOs, Kinderhook, the Bigfoot stuff, all the way to Lake Champlain, how much of this border region, there's so much weird stuff going on, whether it's Bigfoot, Champ, or otherwise. This area, I think, is just like really maybe even underrated in a lot of ways in terms of what people associate with, the subject of Bigfoot even.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to Angelina's Subs in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. That place was awesome.
Yeah, that place was great.
Amazing.
Friday was super exhausting and long. It was entirely a B-roll day. Right? No we shot your interview. Super scenic.
We did my interview and the recap, sort of like the
sum up, summation. Yeah. But it was mostly B-roll, and we did Whiteface, and we did a lot of these mountainous areas and the high peaks. It was like our high peaks day. Super gorgeous, but yeah, really, really like just an intense amount of B-roll. And by the end of the day, I was completely burned, because we were 5 days in, and I think the most I'd slept on any given night was like 4 hours. I hadn't been able to sleep while we were doing it. So yeah, super, super great day, but really exhausting.
And then we all pretty much left at 5 a.m. on Saturday on the 4th to drive back to our respective home states.
Yeah. And thus it ended.
That was a very intense B-roll day. I feel like that also can't be understated. It's like how exhausting that was. Like we went all over.
Yeah.
And film everywhere.
I've discovered that some of those B-roll days can be like that, because like we did a trip recently to shoot B-roll for Mothman Legacy, and it was a day and a half of that kind of thing. And I found that at the end of that trip, I was completely burned out. It was less than 48 hours, but I think the reason is you have to do so much driving, and you're looking for very specific things to shoot. So it's, at least that's my read on it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was just amazing just seeing those areas that we flew over the day before.
Right.
Being in them, seeing Whiteface, and seeing Lake Placid even just from that area. It was not really what I expected it to look like. But it was just a cool, it was great. Like you said, it was a tiring day. And, even as we were wrapping up the interviews in the evening, but it was still just like very nice just to be there and kind of not really having to run around to do too many interviews. We were just getting footage and checking out the views. That was basically what we were doing.
Yeah.
I think part of what made it exhausting is that it was gorgeous everywhere. There wasn't a place where you're like, it was everywhere you wanted to capture.
Or you were just constantly trying to film.
Yeah. Personally speaking, like everywhere, I wanted to make sure we didn't miss a spot.
Yeah. So John Wilkes just texted me and he said, don't forget to shout out the random brown dog.
Oh, that dog was adorable.
That dog was so adorable. And
I
felt bad for it.
But then the owner, like you guys went up into the woods and the owner came by and she was like delirious.
I was hearing it. Yeah.
She was going nuts. Jeff Shepard, he was a fantastic researcher from Massachusetts, kind of was stuck dealing with her, and a couple of us were hanging back. But we had this dog basically with us the entire time we were interviewing John and Dave and the Squatchachusetts crew. And it was like the friendliest dog ever, real nice. But then it just sort of didn't want to go home. And the owner kept calling it. And she came up and was kind of berating us that we were feeding it and whatnot. But anyway, shout out to you, John. You're awesome. Yes. And Dave and your whole crew. And I'm glad to call you guys friends for sure.
Thanks for the shirt. John gave us a shirt.
He gave my brother a shirt too. Yeah. Thank you.
My dad's been wearing his Squatchachusetts shirt for 4 years, since the Beast of Whitehall premiere in Whitehall, New York, that John gave me.
So I got the bumper sticker on my car, Squatchachusetts. I love representing for those guys.
Yeah, I think It's not often that I'm like hyper to get into editing a movie. And I'm there with this one. It's unfortunate because I won't get to edit this for 4 months. I'm going to be focused, we're wrapping up Mothman Legacy right now, and I'll be going into Bell Witch next. But this is like right now, this is where my head is entirely on this. So that bugs me because I hate having to wait on something like that. But I think it'll be good for the project too, because it'll give me a new perspective on it when I come back to it.
A bit of time to sit on it, yeah.
Yeah, but I can't wait to get into this because I can tell you just from looking at the B-roll and everything we've shot, if it isn't the best looking SDM doc, it's going to be real close. I mean, it's going to be this or like maybe a couple episodes of On the Trail of UFOs. It's going to be one or the other. There's nothing that's going to compete with this in terms of the drone footage, the helicopter footage. Some individual clips in that helicopter footage turned out like looking like planet Earth or something, where you're flying in this profile across the mountains. You can just see the valleys. And that's the biggest thing for me is, as far as the helicopter trip goes, from a filmmaking standpoint, I finally understand why people charter helicopters when they're filmmakers. And when people are like, well, why do you have to? You have drones now. It's
right.
A totally different look. Like I could shoot 100 millimeters with my lens, and you get this insane depth of field on the mountain with a valley behind it. Yeah, from now on, like On the Trail of, we're going to try to charter helicopters every time that I can afford it, because it's totally worth it visually.
Mind blowing. Everything. I think even, just being from the as we talked about, the wide variety of terrain and areas we were in, but that the one common denominator was just the amount of forest that was everywhere. It was an amazing amount of forest where plenty of other wildlife exist and thrive. It kind of makes sense. And I think a lot of us, our conclusions were pretty similar about just the subject of Bigfoot and how we all kind of ended up there.
Yeah. If they exist there. That's the way I feel about it.
If there's a place I've been that I think more than anywhere they could actually be, it's undoubtedly there. Like Fouke, it felt like, something could be right there and you not know, with like how thick the underbrush is and, the isolation away from people that's there. But like there's in the Adirondacks, like when we were up on Whiteface, you could just look and there were just woods, and like thick woods, not like where you couldn't see in, and you could just like almost like look.
It's forest. It's forest that looks like ocean, like it stretches to the horizon.
Yeah, it could go from there to there, and you'd never be seen. And part of that was like right by you, because like the side of the mountain, it could be right there, and no one ever know.
Right. No, I totally agree. It's just mind blowing, and I think it was cool for all of us. It was really an introduction to like the true Adirondacks, even though, and like I said, Whitehall, the gateway. It's the gateway to that area.
One thing I should say too is like I've been to the Olympic Peninsula. Like I've been to the Pacific Northwest, which is considered like Squatch Central or whatever. And I'd put the High Peaks area and really all of the Adirondacks alongside the Olympic Peninsula. I'll tell you one thing, like coming through, parts of the Adirondacks really reminded me of like the Cascades out in the Pacific Northwest. And Mark made the comment that the bodies of water reminded him of the Olympic Peninsula. I remember him saying that. And I saw that too, like you got these mountainous lakes and rivers and things like that. It really does remind you of the Olympic Peninsula in that way as well. It doesn't have the same, like, the Olympic Peninsula looks like you've stumbled into a rainforest. Yeah. This doesn't have that same kind of look to it, but in terms of the terrain, the way the terrain rises and falls, it really did remind me of that.
So, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it makes sense. And I think even just, I mentioned that when we were flying over some of these mountains, and you just see these little blue clear ponds up at the top, and there's like no visible trail to it. You just wonder, when was the last time a human being actually went up to one of these things? Mm-hmm. We flew over it, obviously, but who's going and using these bodies of water? Moose, Bigfoot? I mean, probably not people very often. So, and that's something I've heard always about the Adirondacks, was just how remote they are, the High Peaks area. Whereas, even just comparing to the White Mountains here, there's a highway that goes straight through it. There's like hikers all over the place. Whereas here, it really is pretty remote. and especially I can imagine out in the western part of it, in the areas that we didn't even touch upon, which hopefully at some point in the future that'll happen, because it's like uncharted territory. It really is an expedition, and that's why it felt like an expedition.
Yep.
All right, so I think we'll start wrapping up here, but I did want to take just a couple of questions. I want to take this guy Chris's question. Chris Spitzer says, "Hi guys, what's the main difference between this documentary and the previous one? If you could just sum it up in like the biggest main difference, what would it be in your opinion, Seth? We can all
yeah, I mean, like the biggest difference. I mean, I think it probably is the personal angle. I think is very different from the first one. Not the first series is very personal too, but this is our story. Like, this is literally going to be our, like the narrative device that is propelling the entire project forward and kind of introducing you to New York and Massachusetts and the history and the investigators and all that is us. So that's very different from anything SDM. So I think that's probably the biggest. But as far as like, I want to stick to the way On the Trail of Bigfoot was told, because it succeeded in what we were trying to do. Like, keep it ground level, keep it focused on the people, no really dramatic recreations, that kind of stuff. That's what we're going to continue doing with the series.
What do you think, Andy?
Just briefly, and Seth, it's basically what Seth's saying. Seth and the crew are in it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as opposed to On the Trail of UFOs or something like that, it's like, it's a lot. It's like, I feel like I have no clue what the end product will be. I mean, outside of the interviews, which even often feature, parts of the crew, like, there isn't much that doesn't have that. And I'm sure there'll be B-roll and things like that don't have us in it. But like, at least from a filming standpoint, compared to other shoots I've been on, there's a lot more of the crew just being around, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I would say the biggest would be the obvious one, the area we're in. I think that this is going to show the Northeast, New York, and even Western Massachusetts, just that whole area. It's going to show it in a way it's never been really shown before for Bigfoot. Like, there's been previous documentaries that have shown, like with Beast of Whitehall, the Whitehall area, or Monster Quest, some of the stuff, but I don't think it's like it's encapsulated what the Adirondacks mean for Bigfoot research. And I think this will definitely put it on on like, not a pedestal, but just an area that's never really been portrayed in this way.
Yeah, I think actually this storytelling, the way this one's going to tell the story of the Adirondacks, is going to establish what we're doing with On the Trail of Bigfoot going forward, which is you're going to get really, really detailed deep dives into these geographical regions, because I can tell you we have some stuff coming up after this that is going to do the same sort of thing with other parts of the country, and that's kind of my plan, is to really dive into some of these areas where these stories are set.
Yeah, definitely. We'll take another question and comment here. So this is from my buddy Stefan. He says, have you explored any of these sites before? Will you go back for further research? What's it like sleeping next to Alex?
I slept? I don't think I've slept next to Alex yet, thankfully.
You're in the same camp.
I was in a room across the hall from Alex, but I had my fans going so loud that I couldn't hear them snoring. It sounded like a symphony of snores. I opened the door and it sounded like a jet engine landing in the room across the hall. So I was just glad that I had the fan going.
Accurate.
Yeah, but I forgot the rest of the question. I was so focused on the snoring.
I think we kind of already talked about, we haven't really been to this area before, but will we go back? That's sort of the area.
Yes.
Will you go back to some of these areas?
I want to live there.
I'd go back anytime.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime. Yeah. Anytime and anywhere in that region. I would go back. I'd go back to Western Massachusetts. I would go back to any part of the Adirondacks. Anywhere we were on that trip, I'd go back in a heartbeat.
Definitely. I'm going to try and hike Mount Marcy this summer or into the fall or something like that. It's something that needs to be done. So Gerald Lang says, hey, Seth, I realized I have the book Monsters of the Northwoods you mentioned in the recent podcast. It's a great read, and I paid $2.99 for it. I actually live about 2 hours from Whitehall.
So I just paid $90 for it. So congratulations. It's worth buying. I'll say that.
Absolutely. So Ted says, would love to have you guys back in the ADK. Absolutely. Yeah, well, I think that's it for questions. We'll just kind of start wrapping up. Any final thoughts, guys?
Oh, I just can't wait for people to see it. Really, like I mean, I can't overstate this enough. Like, I really think in terms of an introduction to a region, that movie is going to be something really special. Yeah, I can't just the trailer. I'm gonna try to cut a sizzle reel this week for the guys. Like, I can't wait to like dive back into the footage. And I haven't even looked at footage yet from the FS7, which is like our bad boy camera that Alex was wielding all weekend like a bazooka.
Yeah.
So I'm
to
pumped
experiment a little bit with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pumped to look at that too. So,
About you, Andy, what do you think?
I can't wait to see the end product, and I feel like any rough cut or anything like that I can get my hands on, I will watch repeatedly. But just looking back on it, like having been on several other STM shoots, this one like is so special in my memory. I think because I had a larger part to do. I mean, not to belittle any of those other shoots, but it was fun having a larger part to do. And overall, this sort of like changed the way I view the subject in a very interesting way that I think will stick with me for a while.
Yeah.
I'm a lot more skeptical now, is the honest truth.
He doesn't believe at all.
But I mean, it also seeing a place that I feel like one could be anywhere helps with that. But somehow I ended up being a little more skeptical, which for those who don't know, I was already fairly skeptical to begin with. So
just be patient. It's gonna come when you don't expect it. That's the thing about it.
Well, you know what's funny? So my friend Stefan, who asked the question a little while ago, he was up here for the 4th, and we went out to my area where I've had stuff happen. We did a fireworks. We were just hanging around by the fire. Like 1 a.m., we heard what sounded like wood knocks, and he's like, "Dude, this is so freaky. Let's get out of here." And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I don't know. It's obvious. It's like too good to be true, but it's besides the point. I would say I was really just so happy to be a part of this production and just hanging out with everyone and seeing some of these places. Just felt really fortunate. And what I love about working with Seth is, we get all the footage, whatever. We're going visiting these locations. We're making great memories, but then like you turn it over to him, you really it's going to be something amazing, but it always comes out a little bit better than like how you think it is going to come out. Especially like that's what I love about. Like when you'll send us a sizzle reel or you'll send us like a trailer or something like that, it's always like something like you just cannot wait to watch, especially if you're out running an errand and he's like, "Oh, hey guys, I whipped this together." I'm like, I cannot wait to just watch this on a big screen. So I think people should be really excited. Thanks, Mike, obviously, and Ted, guys who came into the chat tonight, and thank you for being part of the production and everyone. And yeah, definitely check out Monstropolis because you guys are going to be talking about this more in depth as well with Mark. Get Mark's perspective. He was obviously a big part of On the Trail of Bigfoot, the first part as well. But yeah, just the full circleness of this all, because like On the Trail of UFOs was more of like you and Shannon, and like we all kind of played a small role. On the Trail of Bigfoot was you and Mark. It was just like everything. It's just really, really full circle.
Yeah.
Stefan's clarifying. He says, despite the fact I was scared in the woods, Alex kept me out there till 1:30 in the morning. It's true.
I have to say one more thing. STM fans, you will love this one. If you're like already looking forward to it, you're gonna lose your minds. Because I'm losing my mind. And
yeah,
it's gonna be amazing.
You've been losing your mind since you were 13.
That's true.
He's like Andy's like the case study, like growing up with small town monsters, basically.
Yeah.
One day I will be the small town monster.
Yeah, right.
I am small town.
But if you guys want to see pictures like behind the scenes stuff, we've posted a bunch of stuff all on our personal accounts as well as like on the Facebook Small Town Monsters community and the page. Go check it out because those visuals alone are amazing. So a lot more good to come. Thank you both for being here. I'm glad we got to do this sort of mission debrief, if you will, and just talk it out. And it has me missing it already. I think we're all still in that doldrum kind of missing, in denial that it's over.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks. Thank you guys for tuning in. Questions and comments. Next week, we're having David Weatherly on. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we're going to be talking cryptozoology, ufology, all kinds of stuff. David's really done a lot, not just the cryptid stuff. So 8 p.m. Eastern next Monday. We will see you guys then. Thanks again, everyone, and have a good night.